A childhood friend of mine was one of the kindest, most empathetic people that I've ever known. This guy did a hitch in the Navy, got into computers afterward, played guitar in a local band, and was the type of guy who would help anyone if they needed it. Just genuinely a good-hearted man. Then he married one of those pretty mean girls, and things kind of went to shit. Now, she was stunning, truly gorgeous, but she was also spoiled, narcissistic, and clearly loved the idea of marriage more than the marriage itself. She wanted this big wedding, the musician husband, all the attention, and the keepsake photos. But being an actual wife, she had no interest in that. She was the golden child in her family and had been treated like one her entire life. Well, not long after the wedding, they bought a piece of land and decided to build a house on it. My friend borrowed money for this, and his family physically built that house with their own hands in order to help keep costs down. They framed it, worked on it, and poured their time and labor into it. He was paying them back over time while she spent money, socialized, and occasionally worked a part-time job whenever she felt like it. Inside of 2 years, she was clearly already bored. She started having an affair, or maybe never stopped having affairs, depending on who you ask. But eventually, she got caught. My friend, being who he was, tried his best to work things out. He wanted to save the marriage. But her response? She filed false domestic abuse accusations, got a restraining order, and then filed for divorce. That order kept him out of the very house that he and his family had built with their hands. So now, this guy was back in his childhood bedroom, still paying his family back for the house, still ordered to pay toward the land and maintain responsibility for the upkeep of it, all while his estranged wife got to stay in the house and entertain other men there. I think that part really burned everyone. But luckily, my friend had a good lawyer, and that lawyer started digging. Turns out, while the land mortgage was in her name, the house as a structure itself was not properly listed on the deed, the way that people had assumed. The family still technically had ownership claims tied to unpaid labor, materials, and how the build had been financed. And this is where things got interesting. Now, my family, we owned a heavy equipment business, and one of the things that we specialized in was structural moving. Houses, buildings, large units, that sort of thing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should Google it. So when the wife went on vacation with her family and her new boyfriend, that's when we made our move. We rolled in, jacked the house up, slid the steel under it, and drove the entire thing away. Have you ever seen a house repossessed? When she got back, all that remained was the foundation, exposed pipes and wires sticking out of the ground, along with a cheap used yard shed containing all of her personal belongings. Now, I'll say that the judge was reportedly furious, but underhanded and illegal, those are two different things. The court order covered the mortgaged land. It did not cover the house itself. She legally had the dirt. We took the house that sat on it. Now, if the story ended here, I think it would already be legendary, but it didn't. Because we had a guy in our circle named Big Bob, and the name couldn't have been more apt. Big Bob was one of those men that every town seems to produce once a generation. Huge, fearless, a guy that barely concerned himself with rules, consequences, jail, or even common sense. The dude was a walking wrecking ball. We even called him Demolition Man for a while after that Sylvester Stallone movie came out. And apparently, Big Bob took this divorce personally. That's when weird things started happening. When the wife's dad and some friends came to retrieve more of her belongings from the shed, they reportedly found giant adult toys smeared with dried whipped cream, explicit magazines, bizarre paraphernalia, and enough embarrassing junk to make everyone involved deeply uncomfortable. Then someone submitted her photos to an old school dating and escort magazine. This was pre-internet, and they even listed her phone number. The calls became so relentless that her family had to change numbers multiple times. Someone started filing change of address cards through the post office, rerouting her mail all around the country. Important mail disappeared, including one particularly costly letter. She had been required to obtain her own car insurance after the legal separation, but because she never got the notice, her coverage lapsed. A few days later, her car mysteriously burned in her workplace parking lot, and she had no insurance to cover it. Then came the flyers. Someone printed intimate photos of her with another man, his face blacked out, with captions pointing out that the man in the photos was not her husband at the time. Those flyers appeared under windshield wipers at her family church, any job she worked, in the neighborhood she lived in, and anywhere she tried to maintain appearances. At this point, police got involved, but they could never locate where the flyers were printed. I think it's important to note here that Big Bob drove trucks cross-country for a living, so there was no telling which Kinkos he had used. Eventually, after enough humiliation and chaos, she agreed to let my friend buy her out of the land for a reasonable amount and drop the restraining order. Basically, he had to pay for everything twice. A little rough, but at least this ordeal would finally be over. Once he had the clear title, something amazing happened. Within a week, the house was right back where it belonged. It was still sitting on the steel beams that we used to move it, so all we had to do was hook up a truck, haul it back, and drop it right back where it originally stood, almost like it had never left. That should have been the end of it, but Pretty Mean Girl was still pretty mean. She later started dating another man from a hard-working, respectable family, a family that was doing well for themselves. She love-bombed the poor guy, and he had no clue what was coming. She bragged publicly that her upcoming bachelorette party would cost more and be better than the original wedding she'd had with my friend. Apparently, those comments reached the wrong ears, because that's when the next phase of revenge began. Those same flyers showed up at the groom's bachelor party, held at his parents' house with family present. Meanwhile, her bachelorette party at a local rec lake got raided for drugs. Police found people in various stages of undress, including the bride-to-be, along with drugs and piles of alcohol. That wedding, it collapsed before it even happened. Not long after this, the wedding dress from her first marriage to my friend, one that had been missing for a while at this point, appeared in her front yard, adorning a scarecrow. Someone had painted what looked like blood on it and put a pentagram on the front for good measure. No one had even realized that the dress was missing up until that point, but she got it back. For years after this, every time she got serious with someone new, those flyers would mysteriously return. Every workplace, every relationship, every seeming fresh start. Eventually, age and consequences caught up with her. She gained a lot of weight, stopped seriously dating for a while, and later married a truck driver, not Big Bob. As for my friend, he got free. He was able to enjoy his life, and for the last little bit, he's been doing exactly that. Big Bob has passed on now, but big shout out to him and a big RIP as well. You're one hell of a friend, one hell of a menace, and one hell of a loyal bastard. Know that your friends raise a glass to you every time we meet. I've been asked for years why I've never shared this story with the masses. I've never really been able to come up with a good answer to that, and that's what brings me here today. I met my ex in 2012, right after I had just turned 30. At that point, I'd only dated and been with women exclusively until I came out as bisexual at 28. Let's just say the year I was 29 was a busy year, making up for what I felt like I had missed out on. It was mostly casual hookups. Yes, the safe variety. And I did try dating 2 different guys for a few weeks, but just never worked out or got serious. I kind of figured that I'd end up marrying a woman or not getting married at all because I just didn't see myself catching romantic and sexual feelings for a guy. But then I met Ryan. From the first date, it was just like the only other time in my life that I had fallen in love. Butterflies, constantly thinking about him, wanting to spend every moment with him. He fell for me hard too, and we became an item, though he did say while he considered my bisexuality a turn-on, partly because he had a thing for straight guys, it also gave him pause because of my desires for the opposite sex and his concern that it may lead me astray. I thought about it and understood it was a legitimate worry, but I assured him that I couldn't even think about anyone else because I was so into him. Note, I knew that he was the one by the end of the first month and I was in love, but I wasn't going to say these things too soon and risk scaring him off. On our first date, he admitted to me that he was legally blind due to a genetic disorder and that it was progressive and eventually he would only have a sliver of his peripheral vision left. He immediately said that he understood if I didn't want to see him again because no other guy had wanted to date him and be his driver all of the time. I grew up with a brother in a wheelchair who never learned how to walk or talk due to misdiagnosed meningitis at 6 months old back in the 70s. I told him this and said that what my brother had was a severe disability, so in my perspective, his blindness had no effect on my feelings, and that always being the driver was a small sacrifice just to be with him. The following years were bliss. We brought out the best in each other. My family, who was surprised but very supportive when I came out, adored Ryan and treated him like family and said that I acted happier since we'd been together. When I met him, he was working part-time in retail and had done very poorly in high school because he lost a lot of his confidence as his vision deteriorated. I told him that one thing I did insist on was that he do something with his life because he had too much to offer and that I would help where I could. He said that he'd wanted to be a teacher but didn't think someone with limited vision could teach. Nonsense. So I put him through community college for 2 years, then 2.5 years of a local university, and finally the 1-year teacher certification program as required by the state of California. I drove countless miles and paid hundreds in public transportation costs for him, never batting an eyelash or complaining. We'd been together for nearly 8 years, and were engaged to be married in October by the time he was in his last semester of his teaching certification, which involved him student teaching at his former high school with his favorite teacher from his days back then. Then the pandemic hit, and schools closed down. Fortunately, he'd had enough hours in the classroom that he would still qualify to be certified after the governor issued a waiver via executive order. On the 3rd day of the stay-at-home order in March, my life crumbled when I innocently found out that he had cheated on me with an ex, all because he handed his phone to me to show me something on Instagram. I accidentally fat-thumbed the back arrow when he gave it to me, taking me back to a list of all of his messages. I looked and recognized the name of his ex, Johnny, as the second message, and that message was dated just a week back. I clicked on it and my heart sank. Directions to my house, pictures, dirty talk, and reassuring Johnny not to worry about me because he had my location on Find My Friends, just in case I were to come home early from work. I immediately started screaming, demanding to know everything, and he admitted to having his ex over twice for sex, that they didn't use protection either time. Johnny was engaged to his girlfriend during this, so add another victim. Then Ryan admitted to sleeping with his straight but curious recently single cousin Tyler, twice, again with no protection. Finally, he admitted to sleeping with a supposedly straight guy named Thomas that he and many of my cousins went to school with, who I told Ryan I really didn't like, nor did I trust after what I'd read about him. Since they were never close friends, I didn't feel like this was a big sacrifice or that I was being too controlling, and I assumed that he knew why I and all my cousins felt that way, but didn't bother repeating it. The reason was after high school at age 20, this guy was convicted of sexual assault and penetration with a foreign object against a 16-year-old girl. He'd gone to jail and was required to register as a sex offender for life. Apparently, my ex was the only person in his graduating class that hadn't heard the news. All of this happened in my home while I was working. We spent the whole weekend crying, with me asking over and over why, and him repeatedly crying and saying he just didn't know, and that he felt terrible. Monday comes around and anger started being as common as sadness, and I made a comment saying that I was going to pull all the phone records going back 3 years in order to see what he had been up to. Only when he heard that did he admit to one more guy, some random named Frankie off of a gay hookup app. That was the first guy that he cheated on me with, and he continued to casually hook up with him for nearly 2 years, with the last time being back in February, which is the month before all of this took place. He told me how it started, and get this, it was the day after his graduation with his bachelor's in May of 2018. He was drunk from celebrating and wanted to have sex. I too had been celebrating with him and said I was too drunk to perform and said that I'd make it up to him the next day, before I then passed out asleep on the couch. Apparently, he was, quote, angry horny because he downloaded Grindr then and there, chatted with this Frankie fellow, and arranged to have sex in his car in a church parking lot across the street from our condo, which happens to be across the street from a school. This fact, important for later. He did all of this while I slept on the couch. All the times they hooked up after that was again in my condo while I was working or visiting a friend for the night. Ryan used to enjoy coming with me to see this friend, but started saying that he couldn't occasionally because of homework and studying. I absolutely lost it on him. I told him to get in the car, and I drove him to his family's house so he could tell them what he did so they understood why he was moving back into their house. While he was in their home, I was in the driveway on the phone with AT&T, ordering the 3 years worth of detailed call and text logs. Then I made an appointment to be screened for STIs. I suspended his phone service until he could figure out how to pay for his own damn phone. Then I temporarily changed all of his passwords on the social media accounts that he cheated with, and to make sure that he couldn't hide more evidence, so only I would have access to his cloud. Funny enough, we shared each other's passwords on his suggestion years before. I also called the bank and issued a stop payment on his final tuition check that I had sent to the certification program the week before, a check that hadn't hit the bank yet. Before deleting his social media, except for Facebook, I took screenshots of the entire Instagram conversation with Johnny the ex and mailed the conversation to Johnny's fiancée, who deserved to know, so she could see a doctor and get tested too. Johnny's family was very religious and had kicked him out in high school for 3 days when he tried to admit that he was bi, and only took him back in when he took it back. Needless to say, Johnny's fiancée ended it. He got kicked out. 1 down. Ryan came back to the car and we went home. I took his house key and told him to say goodbye to our 3 pets and start packing. The entire time he packed up, I studied those phone records to find out dates, times, and if there was anyone else that he might have been leaving out. He answered every question I asked, and it was then that I discovered that Thomas, the sex offender, well, they had only had oral sex in my home, and that the actual sex was in the same parking lot that he screwed that Frankie guy in. The wheels began to turn the next day. I walked over to the church and sure enough, spotted a camera. I spoke to this sweet old secretary lady at the church and informed them about a registered sex offender having sex in their lot, and that not only was it a violation of his parole for indecent exposure, but that he was not allowed to be that close to a school, and I provided the date. I was in luck. They had a digital 2-year loop system that started deleting day by day after it had been retained for 2 years. It was April 2020, and he first cheated with Frankie in May of 2018. And the sex offender? That was in April 2019. I told them I was filing a police report and that probation would require a copy of that tape eventually. They said they would save the file and allowed me a thumb drive of both days to submit with my police report. Within a month, Thomas the sex offender was locked up again. 2 down now. I also filed a police report against the Frankie guy. The police said it was a relatively minor infraction, but since it was across from a school playground and a skate park, that they would follow up, but there would be no jail time. I researched the hell out of Frankie and called him to confront him. He was smug and admitted to knowing about me the entire time. What he didn't know is that I had found out he had a job that required a security clearance, and he had several judgments against him and collection agencies had been looking for him. Best money I ever spent on a data collection site. I didn't know why they couldn't find him and just garnish his wages, but it ends up that he had 2 familial last names, along with being a junior. Plus, he frequently went by his middle name Francisco, Frankie for short, so he got lost in paperwork confusion. I sent a letter to the collection agencies providing his employer and current location and contact info, and then sent a copy of the police report about misdemeanor indecent exposure for which he pled guilty and was met with a fine and community service. This isn't considered a sex crime. His wages did get garnished, but only for 2 paychecks because the misdemeanor was enough for him to lose his security clearance and then be fired. 3 down. Then I contacted Ryan's family on his mother's side, pretending to be him from his Facebook account, making sure they knew he had fucked his cousin Tyler. It spread through the family like wildfire, and soon Tyler was contacting me because he couldn't get a hold of Ryan to ask why would he expose what they did. I just laughed and said, "You shouldn't screw your cousins, especially when they're engaged," and that he'd messed around in my house, so now it was my turn for payback. 4 down. Lastly, I had already stopped payment, but since he was so close to finishing, I was sure that his family would bail him out and pay the university. Like I said, indecent exposure is usually a slap on the wrist type misdemeanor. However, I remembered some of the paperwork he signed to be a mandated reporter, and that you could lose teaching certification for documented acts of moral turpitude. I sent a copy of both police reports from the parking lot with still shots from the security camera footage clearly showing Ryan's face to the school district, the one that he'd been teaching in, as well as a copy to the Commission on Teacher Credentials. 5th and final down. Admittedly, I did all of this out of anger, but Ryan shattered my sense of self-worth and made me incredibly bitter and untrusting after years of being generous and supporting him. Everywhere I looked in the town, I thought of Ryan and the cheating. I felt a terrible energy in my condo knowing that it all happened right there. I stayed 9 months and watched all 5 of their lives self-destruct. Then I sold my condo, making a nice profit, and relocated to the Pacific Northwest to start over. One thing that is sad is that I found out just recently that the ex, whose fiance broke up with him, Johnny, well, he ended up taking his life several months after I moved. It's too bad that his family was so close-minded to turn on their own son. But in the end, it's not my fault that he cheated on his fiance by coming into my home at my fiance's invitation to cheat. Suicide is never the answer to one's problems, and I hope the fiance that he cheated on doesn't blame herself, and that only his family does, as they should. Update. For those that haven't seen the original post comments, yes, I did seek therapy. This was all 5 or 6 years ago now, and after 18 months of therapy that didn't really help, I was referred to a newer therapy for PTSD called ketamine infusion therapy, and it was like magic. In 6 sessions over 3 weeks, I was relieved of all of my pent-up anger and resentment, and actually able to trust and date again. I'm proud to say that I'm now happily married and settled in the Pacific Northwest. This is the story of my uncle and how he exacted revenge on his wife in a way that left her with nothing. No status, no children, no dog, and no money. So at the time, my uncle and his wife seemed to have a great relationship. They did everything together. She was a good mother on the surface, but she was completely dependent on my uncle financially. He worked, she stayed home, taking care of the kids, and as it turned out, sleeping with another man. My uncle and his wife had 2 children together, ages 6 and 12. Now, for some context here, my uncle's brother, not my dad, had recently passed away. He was grieving heavily. For months, all he wanted was comfort, someone to hold him, to be close with him, but that didn't exactly encompass sex. The thing is that his wife didn't seem to care. She'd give him a quick kiss here or there, maybe a short hug, and then go right back to whatever it was she was doing. When family asked why his wife seemed so distant, I think that my uncle believed that the death of his brother had taken a toll on her too, and he'd simply explain it away as everyone grieves in their own way. Turns out, her way of grieving involved cheating on him with a family friend. Now, this guy had been around forever, and during this mourning period, he started visiting the house more and more, usually during the day while my uncle was at work. He'd bring his kids along so that the kids could play while the adults talked. My uncle didn't think anything of it. He just assumed that these were casual visits by a friend, or play dates with the kids. That was until his youngest son showed him a drawing. Now, one day, the boy had come up to him and said he had a secret. Told his dad that Mommy and the family friend were playing a special game together, and that Mommy said no one else was allowed to know. That alone made my uncle super uneasy, but he still didn't think that she would ever cheat on him. Not her, she was always so proper. She perfectly kept the house, nice clothes, even a little snobbish. She clearly was the last person he'd expect to cheat. that's when his son pulled out this crumpled piece of paper that he had hidden under his bed. He explained that his mom had thrown it away, but he went and got it out of the trash because he thought Daddy might like it. It was a drawing of his. The boy said Mommy told him not to draw her and the family friend again because this was a private game. But he'd felt hurt after his mom had thrown it away, so he kept it. When my uncle looked at it, it was exactly what you think. A child's drawing of the family friend on top of his wife. My uncle was in shock, but he stayed calm enough to take photos of the drawing and asked his son to explain everything that he could. When did he see this happen? Where was it? What had he actually seen? And that's when things only got worse. And unfortunately, it took both of his kids telling him what was happening on the regular. During the day, while they'd play outside, the wife would lock the doors and leave all the kids unsupervised for half an hour to an hour at a time, clearly while she was having sex with this man, all over the house. What was worse is that the older kids had somehow turned it into a game of their own. They would take turns watching or listening, trying to peek through curtains or listen through doors, while the youngest kids would make their playing noises outside to avoid alerting the adults. All of this coming from a woman who acted like she was the definition of class and perfection. So naturally, my uncle confronted her, but she only seemed to double down. I needed sex, and you wouldn't give it to me. You kept denying me, so I went and I found it elsewhere. She actually said that she had the right to do it, that he wasn't meeting her needs, and that she needed to feel wanted and loved. Think about that for a second. She cheated while he was grieving his brother. She neglected the kids, exposed them to the acts, and then had the nerve to blame him for it? Well, as you can imagine, a few months later, they ended up divorced. She went on to marry the same family friend that she cheated with, and that man, unbelievably, had the audacity to defend her. He told my uncle that what she had done was justified, that he should have taken care of her better. So now my uncle had lost his wife, his marriage, and had to deal with this guy teaching life lessons. At first, my uncle did what he could to let it go. He went to church and he prayed for her. He refused to speak badly about her. But that's when she started texting him. At first, it was things about their separation or the kids, asking if they can stay over an extra night, or making sure that he had made arrangements for them when he had to work. But at some point, the tone and topics started to shift. She started saying that she missed him, that she wanted him, among other things. Eventually, it became crystal clear that she wanted to cheat again. This time, roles reversed, on her new husband with my uncle. When my uncle realized that she was ready to blow up her family for the second time, that's when he stopped being so forgiving, but keeping his cards close to his chest. He played along. He led her on, encouraged it, got her to send him messages, explicit texts, even videos. But none of this was for his own enjoyment, at least in that type of way. He was creating a portfolio of proof. And then once he had enough, he sent everything on to her new husband. If I remember correctly, this was right during the time that they were trying to start a family of their own together. That destroyed the marriage. And because of how things unfolded, combined with her instability, her lack of financial independence, and the legal situation in my country, she ended up losing everything. Before her marriage to my uncle, she had signed a prenup rather carelessly. Now in the divorce, she got a rather sizey one-time sum of money, an amount that for a lot of people in my country, she would have been able to make a life of for 5, 6, maybe even 10 years. But she burned through that money fast with her new relationship. Luxury hotels, expensive trips, this massive wedding, and a honeymoon that lasted for a month, traveling to places like Dubai and through the Mediterranean. She spent money like it would never run out. But it did. And when her new husband left her, she had no income, no support, no assets. She couldn't take care of the kids anymore. So my uncle got full custody of the children and the dog. She went from acting like she was above everyone else to being completely broke in rather short order. The last that anyone heard, She was begging for help, asking to see her kids. But then all that stopped and she sort of just dropped off the face of the planet. No one really knows where she is now. I personally think that she ran off to try and start a new life for herself, but what do I know? The guy that defended her, the one who said cheating was justified and then married her himself, well, he got to experience exactly what it felt like. I wonder what his thoughts on justification are now. I find it poetic that my uncle, he just tried to move on. He was ready to just let things go. But when she tried to pull him back into her own antics, he knew what had to be done, and he did it to perfection.